There's a moment, and most people only get one, when you realize the wall you built around yourself isn't protecting you anymore. It's just keeping you in. Clara Hofstede had been in that wall for 3 years. She didn't talk about why. She didn't need to. The women who came into her shop, the ones who bought lavender sachets and hand-stitched quilts and the little jars of honey she stocked from the Reeves farm down the road, they could see it in the way she smiled. That particular smile. The one that reaches the lips but stops very precisely just below the eyes. I know that smile, I've worn it. I'm not the hero of this story. I want to make that plain before you read another word. My name is Ellis Boone, and I run cattle on 40 acres north of Harlan Creek, Wyoming. I've got a dog named Pepper who is smarter than me, a pair of boots I've owned for 11 years, and the kind of loneliness that doesn't announce itself at night. It just sits across from you at breakfast and doesn't say a damn thing. I was in Clara's shop the morning Calhoun Briggs walked through that door. I saw everything that happened next. And I'm still not sure I have the right words for it, but I'm going to try. Because I think some stories need a witness, not a hero, not a narrator who wraps it clean at the end and tells you what it meant. Just someone who was there, someone who paid attention. It was the 3rd week of October, and the cold had already come down off the Tetons like it meant business. I remember that specifically because I'd driven into Harlan Creek to pick up a prescription for my knee, an old rodeo injury that flares every autumn, regular as a calendar. And I'd stopped into Clara's shop afterward because she stocked the only decent coffee in town that wasn't burnt to the bottom of a pot. Clara's place was called Threadwork and Things, which was exactly what it was. A narrow, warm storefront on Main Street that sold handmade goods and local craft items, and had 3 small tables near the window where you could sit and drink coffee from mismatched mugs and watch the street go gray with weather. I was at the far table with my knee aching and a mug of something that smelled like cardamom in autumn, and Clara was behind the counter rearranging a display of hand-carved wooden ornaments that a man named Petrov had brought in from up near Cody. She had her hair pinned up the way she always did, dark brown, a few strands escaping near her temple, and she was humming something I didn't recognize. Not a song exactly, more like a melody she was making up as she went. That was Clara. She had this quality of being completely present in whatever small task she was doing, like the task deserved her full attention and she was going to give it. She was 41 years old. She'd been divorced for 3 years, separated before that. I'd heard the story the way you hear most stories in a small town, in fragments from different mouths, none of them complete. Her husband, a man named Derek, had moved to Phoenix with someone named Jesse and started a whole new life with what appeared to be very little backward glance. Clara had stayed, kept the shop, kept her cat, a big gray Tom named Biscuit, who spent his days sleeping on the cushion near the register and occasionally accepting chin scratches from customers he deemed worthy. She hadn't dated since. I know people had asked. Carl Prentice from the hardware store had asked her to dinner twice. Marcus Webb, who taught history at the high school, had sent flowers that one spring. She'd thanked both men politely and nothing had come of it. The women who came into the shop said she was guarded. The men who tried said she was intimidating. Both camps were, I think, missing the point. Clara wasn't guarded. She wasn't intimidating. She was tired. There's a difference. A guarded person is still fighting. They're still in the game, just protecting themselves against the next hit. A tired person has stepped off the field entirely. They've looked at the scoreboard, done the math, and decided the energy required to play again isn't worth what you might win. I don't know when I figured that out about her. Somewhere around the 3rd or 4th time, I watched her deflect a compliment like it was a mildly inconvenient gust of wind. Anyway, the door opened at 9:42 in the morning. I remember glancing at the clock above the counter because it was shaped like a rooster, and I found it deeply unnecessary as a design choice, and the man who came in had to turn sideways to clear the frame. Not because he was fat. He wasn't. He was the kind of large that reads as structural, like his bones had been laid in by someone who was planning for rough weather. He was maybe 6'4", with shoulders that belonged on a draft horse, and he was wearing a canvas jacket that had seen several hard winters and a wool hat pulled down over ears that were red from the cold. He had a beard full, dark brown going gray at the jaw, and eyes that were the exact color of the creek in late afternoon light. Not quite green, not quite gray. Something in between that didn't have a proper name. He stood in the doorway for a moment, which was long enough for the cold air he'd brought in with him to reach my table, and he looked around the shop with an expression I can only describe as careful. Not nervous, not lost, just careful, like he was taking an inventory before he committed to anything. Clara looked up from the ornaments. "Morning," she said, the way she said it to everyone. Warm, professional, zero invitation to overstay. "Morning," he said. His voice was low, the kind that seems to come from somewhere deeper than his throat. "I'm looking for Clara Hofstede." Clara set down the ornament she was holding. "That's me." He nodded, came further into the shop. Biscuit opened one eye from his cushion, assessed the newcomer, and closed it again. High praise from a cat of Biscuit's discernment. "My name is Calhoun Briggs," he said. "I live up on the Briggs property north of Powder Ridge. Been up there since my father passed, about 4 years now." He paused like he was deciding how to continue. "I heard you sell local things, handmade things." "I do," Clara said. "Good." He looked around the shop again, the quilts folded on the long shelf, the jars of preserves and honey, the carved ornaments, the small framed paintings by Lenora Dawes that hung near the window. "I also heard—" Another pause, longer this time. "Well, I heard various things. I'll get to the rest of it." Clara's expression shifted by approximately 2 degrees. Not enough to call it curiosity, but something. He bought a jar of honey. He bought a quilt, the big blue and white one that had been hanging on the display rod for 6 weeks. The one Clara had told me she wasn't sure would sell because it was too large for most people's taste. He bought it without asking the price, which was $140, and he paid in cash from a wallet that was held together with a rubber band. Then he stood at the counter and looked at Clara for a moment. "The other thing," he said. "Sure," Clara said, folding his receipt. "I want to get married." The receipt stopped moving. "I'm 38, he said, apparently deciding that context would be helpful. "I've got 160 acres that's mostly in good shape. I've got a house that needs some work but is livable. I've got cattle, a small apple orchard, a vegetable garden I've been tending for 2 years, and a creek that runs clean through the back property." He reached up and scratched the back of his neck, and that was the first gesture I'd seen him make that looked anything like discomfort. "I've been alone up there a long time. I've decided I don't want to do that anymore." Clara looked at him, just looked at him. I couldn't see her face from where I was sitting. I was behind and to her left, but I could see the set of her shoulders, which had gone very still. "And you came into my shop because," she said. "Because I was told you were a fair person," he said. "And because I don't know a lot of people in town anymore, and the ones I know well enough to ask probably aren't, well, they're married, or not interested." He paused. "I'm not asking you specifically. I want to be clear about that. I'm asking if you know anyone, or if you know where to start." There was a moment of silence. Then Clara made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh, but was adjacent to one. It seemed to surprise her as much as it surprised him. "You walked into my shop," she said, "to ask me to help you find a wife." "Yes, ma'am." "Not to ask me specifically." "No, ma'am," although he stopped. "Although what?" He looked at her, direct, without flinching. "You seem like a capable person." Another silence. "That might be the strangest thing anyone said to me in a long time," Clara said. "Probably," he agreed. I sat very still at my table and stared into my coffee mug and tried to look like I was not listening to every syllable of this conversation, which I absolutely was. Clara slid his receipt across the counter. He folded it once and put it in the pocket of his canvas jacket without looking at it. "I'll think about it," she said. He nodded, pulled his wool hat back down over his red ears, picked up the honey and the quilt, which he tucked under his arm with a casualness that suggested he regularly carried large and unwieldy objects. Then he paused at the door. "I'll come back Saturday," he said. "If that's all right." Clara tilted her head slightly, like she was calculating something. "The shop is open Saturday." "Good," he said, and he left. The door swung shut. The cold air dispersed. Biscuit opened both eyes this time, watched the door for a moment, and then went back to sleep. I sat at my table. Clara stood behind her counter. After maybe 30 seconds, she turned and looked directly at me, because of course she'd known I was there the whole time. "Not a word, Ellis," she said. "I didn't say anything. You were thinking very loudly." I wrapped both hands around my mug. He seems like a man who knows what he wants. He seems like a man who walked into a craft shop to ask a stranger to wife shop for him. She went back to the ornaments. That is not the same thing. Clara, Ellis, you laughed. The ornament went back on the hook. I made a sound. You haven't made that sound in 3 years. She looked at me for a long moment, then she turned back to the display. I finished my coffee and drove home, and my knee ached the whole way, and I didn't mind it much. I went back to the shop Thursday. I do that sometimes, come in midweek for coffee when the cattle don't need me too urgently, and the loneliness at breakfast gets a particular weight to it. Nora Kessler was there, which meant there would be talking. Nora is 63 years old and has opinions about everything, and delivers them with the cheerful certainty of someone who has never once been wrong and expects that record to hold. She runs the post office 3 blocks over. She knows everyone's business and doesn't pretend otherwise. She was telling Clara about Calhoun Briggs. I got my coffee and sat down and listened. His father was Emmett Briggs, Nora was saying, perched on the stool across from the register. You remember Emmett, big man, quiet, bought the Powder Ridge property in the 70s and built that house himself. Well, Emmett died heart attack 4 years ago, and Calhoun came back from, where was he? Montana, I think, some logging work, and he just stayed, took the whole property over. Nobody sees much of him. Does he have family? Clara asked. She was sorting through a box of new stock. Her voice was level, interested but not invested, or so she'd have you believe. A sister somewhere. Oregon, maybe. They're not close, I don't think. Nora sipped her tea. He was engaged once, years ago, before he went to Montana. Girl named Pamela Fitch. You wouldn't know her, she was before your time here. They split up and she moved to Denver, and I think she's a dentist now. Nora considered this. Life is strange. It is, Clara agreed. He's not crazy, Nora said. I want you to know that because I know how it must have looked, him coming in here and saying what he said. He's just straightforward. Emmett was the same way. Briggs men don't hem and haw. They decide what they want and they come out with it. She tilted her head. Some people find that disconcerting. I find it refreshing. Clara looked up. He didn't ask me, Nora. He asked if I knew anyone. Nora smiled. It was the smile of a woman who has been reading subtext since before most people learned to read text. Of course he did, she said, entirely without irony. Clara set down the stock. I'm not interested in being someone's solution to a problem. He didn't say you were a solution to a problem, I said from the corner. Both women looked at me. He said you seemed capable, I said. There's a difference. Clara picked the stock back up. You're both very helpful, thank you. Nora drank her tea. I drank my coffee. Biscuits slept. Saturday came. Calhoun Briggs came back at 10 in the morning, as advertised. He was wearing the same canvas jacket and a different hat, brown wool instead of gray, and he had mud on his boots that he scraped against the mat outside before he came in, which I noticed because it's a small gesture and small gestures tell you a lot. There were 2 other customers in the shop, Vera Hutchins and her teenage daughter who were looking at quilts, and Calhoun waited without impatience until they'd finished and left. Then he came to the counter. I thought about what you might need to know, he said, to help. Clara leaned one elbow on the counter. You came back. I said I would. People say a lot of things. He accepted that without offense. I've got a list, he said, and produced from his jacket pocket a folded piece of paper that had clearly been written and rewritten at least once, because the handwriting was too careful and some words were darker where he'd pressed harder. He unfolded it, read from it. I'm not mean, he said. I'm not always warm, and I know that, but I'm not mean. I work hard. The property runs mostly by my effort, and it's in good shape. I don't drink except occasionally. I'm not religious, but I respect that others are. I cook not fancy, but nourishing. He looked up briefly, then back down. I'm patient. I've been told I'm too quiet. That might be true. I don't know how to fix it. He paused. I know how to listen. I think that matters. Clara had not moved. I'm not looking for someone to complete me, he continued. I don't believe in that. I'm looking for someone who wants a real life, hard work, quiet evenings, seasons that actually mean something, someone who doesn't need to be entertained every minute. He folded the paper. And someone who is honest. That's the main thing. Everything else I can work with. Clara was quiet for a long moment. What about love? She said. He looked at her. You didn't mention love, she said, on your list. He was quiet for a moment, not evasive, thinking. I think love is something you find out about later, he said. I think you can want the right things together and love comes or it doesn't, but if you want the wrong things, love doesn't fix it. He tucked the paper back in his pocket. I've seen enough marriages to know that. Clara stared at the counter for a moment. Then she said, "You're right that that's probably true." Is that a strange thing to say? It's an honest thing to say. That's what I was going for. She looked at him. I don't have a roster of available women for you, Mr. Briggs. No, he said, I didn't think you would. Then what exactly are you hoping for? He met her eyes steadily. I'm not entirely sure, he said, but I thought starting here was the right move. Clara said nothing. He nodded once that small, complete nod and said, "Thank you for your time," and turned toward the door. "Come back Tuesday," she said. He stopped, turned. "There's a woman who comes in Tuesdays," Clara said. She was not looking at him now. She was adjusting the position of a honey jar. Late 50s, widowed, she's interesting. You might have things in common. I'm not promising anything, but you could come for coffee. He watched her for a moment. There was something in his face, not gratitude exactly, something quieter than that. "Tuesday," he said. 10 o'clock. He nodded and he left. I was not in the shop that day. Clara told me about it that evening when I stopped by to return a book I'd borrowed. She kept a small lending shelf of novels she loved and inflicted on her regulars. And she relayed it all with the careful neutrality of a person who is very invested in convincing herself she's not invested. "He brought a list," she said. "I know, you told me." "Who brings a list?" "A man who thinks before he speaks," I said. "Is that so terrible?" She was quiet. She picked up a mug that didn't need picking up and set it back down. "He said love comes later," she said, "or it doesn't." I said. "He's not wrong," she said, very quietly, like she was saying it to herself more than to me. "No," I said, "he's not." She looked at the window. The street outside was dark, and the first real snow of the year was coming down, just flurries, not sticking yet, but promising. "I'm not interested in him," she said. "Okay," I said. "I'm helping him as a neighborly thing." "Of course. Stop agreeing with me like that." "How am I agreeing with you?" "Carefully," she said. "You're agreeing with me very carefully, Ellis, and it's extremely irritating." I put my coat on and said good night and drove home. The snow came down all night and covered the 40 acres in white, and Pepper sat at the foot of my bed. And I lay there thinking about two people and a list, and the particular courage it takes to want something out loud. I thought I knew something about walls. I thought I knew something about what happens when you stop asking for what you need because you've been told, not always in words, sometimes just in the way things turned out, that the asking itself will cost you. But Calhoun Briggs had walked into a shop and asked, plainly, without armor. And Clara, who had been inside her wall for 3 years. Tuesday came with 6 inches of new snow, and a sky the color of old pewter. I was not going to go to the shop at 10 o'clock. I had cattle to check, a fence line that needed inspection after the snow wait, and a general policy of not inserting myself into other people's private situations. I was there by 9:55. I sat at my corner table and ordered coffee, and pretended to read a week-old newspaper that Clara kept on the table for exactly this kind of pretense, and I watched. The woman Clara had mentioned was named Ruth Aldershot. She was 57, a widow of 5 years, compact and sharp-faced and possessed of a quick, dry humor that she deployed without warning. She'd moved to Harlan Creek from Billings after her husband passed, a deliberate downsizing, she said, a right-sizing, which was a distinction she maintained mattered. She came in on Tuesdays because she liked the coffee and she liked Clara and she liked biscuit in that order. She arrived at 10:10, unwrapping a scarf that had about 6 feet of length to it. Calhoun was already there. He'd arrived at 5 to 10. I'd watched him come in, scrape his boots, look around, choose a table near the window, and sit with his hands folded on the table with the patience of a man who had waited out entire mountain winters. Clara made introductions with the smoothness of someone who had decided that if she was going to do this, she was going to do it properly. She brought them both coffee. She left them to it. I watched from behind my newspaper. Ruth was the kind of woman who could carry a conversation on her own if she needed to, but she was also smart enough to recognize when not to. She asked Calhoun questions, not nosy questions, practical ones, about the property, about what he grew, about the apple orchard, which seemed to genuinely interest her because she'd grown up around orchards in western Montana and knew something about them. Calhoun answered all of it, directly, without embellishment, but he also asked. That was the thing I noticed. He asked about her, about Billings, about what she'd done there, about the right sizing decision. He listened when she answered in a way that wasn't just waiting for his turn to speak. He was actually tracking it. It was fine. It was perfectly fine. Ruth laughed twice. Calhoun almost smiled once. It had the shape of a beginning. And then I watched Clara from behind the counter. She was restocking a shelf of beeswax candles. She was doing it slowly, more slowly than necessary. And every so often, maybe once every 3 minutes, which is more regular than casual, she would glance over at the table near the window. The glance lasted about a second each time. Then she'd look away. I watched this happen 4 times. I put down the newspaper. Clara was 41 years old and had been divorced for 3 years, and had decided, with very good reason, that she was done with the particular kind of heartbreak that comes from building something with someone who turns out to be building something else entirely, somewhere you can't see. She had made her shop her whole world, and the shop was a good world, warm, purposeful, full of things made by hand, and she was not supposed to be glancing at a table in the corner every 3 minutes. But here's the thing about walls. You can decide to live inside one and mean it completely. You can be right about all the reasons you built it. You can function well and feel okay most days and think, genuinely think, that you've landed in a place you can live with. And then someone walks in and asks for what they want, simply, without decoration, without strategy, and your body starts doing things your mind hasn't authorized. I know that territory. After about 40 minutes, Ruth pulled her phone out and looked at it and said she had to get to an appointment. She shook Calhoun's hand, told him it had been a pleasure, told Clara the coffee was as good as always and the new candles smelled wonderful, and went out wrapped in her improbably long scarf. Calhoun sat for a moment, looking at his coffee. Then he got up and brought his mug to the counter, which most people don't bother to do. They leave them on the table and let Clara collect them, and he said, "She's a good person." "She is," Clara said. It's not the right thing," he said, not unkindly, just honestly. "I don't think it would get there, but she's a good person." Clara nodded. "I appreciate you being decent about it." "I don't know another way to be." He was quiet for a moment. "Can I ask you something?" Clara looked up. "Why did you agree to help me?" he asked. "You didn't have to. You could have said no when I came in." She looked at him for a long moment, long enough that it had some weight to it. "I'm not sure," she said. "That's an honest answer. It's the only one I've got." He nodded. He put on his wool hat. "I'll come back Saturday if that's all right," he said, "unless you've decided it's too strange." "I told you," Clara said. "The shop is open Saturday." He went to the door, stopped with his hand on the frame, the same way he'd done the first day. "For what it's worth," he said without turning around, "I think you're good at this, knowing what fits and what doesn't." He paused. "Probably comes from the shop, knowing what goes together." He went out. Clara stood behind the counter. I folded the newspaper. "Not a word," she said. "I was just going to say the candles smell nice. Ellis, beeswax, very clean scent." She gave me the look. I got up and left without further comment. The Saturdays developed a pattern. He would come in at 10. He would buy something, always something useful, always something local, always paid in cash without being asked the price first. He would drink coffee, and he and Clara would talk. Not about anything in particular at first. He mentioned the apple orchard once, and she asked how many trees, and he said 32, and she said her grandmother had kept an apple tree in her yard in Vermont and made a specific kind of cake every October, and he asked what kind, and she described it, and he listened with the kind of attention most people reserve for instructions they can't afford to get wrong. He mentioned that he'd been reading, working his way through a box of his father's books that he'd found in a back room. His father had been a reader, apparently, and Calhoun was finding things in the books he hadn't expected. He mentioned a novel, Giants in the Earth, Ole Edvard Ralvag's account of Norwegian settlers on the Dakota plains, and said it had kept him up 2 nights. Clara, who kept the lending shelf and inflicted novels on her regulars, went still. "That book," she said. "You know it." "I read it in college," she said. "It wrecked me for a week." He looked at her. "The wife," he said, "Perhance's wife." "Beret," she said. "Yes." "What happened to her, what the land did to her mind?" He stopped, looked at the counter. "I've been alone on that property 4 years, and I've never thought of myself as someone who might understand that, but reading it." "You understood it," Clara said. He looked up. "Some landscapes are too big," she said. "Some silences are too long. People need to be witnessed, to have someone see them living." She paused, seemed to hear herself, looked slightly away. He was very quiet. "Anyway," she said, "it's a great book." "It is," he said. That particular Saturday they talked for 2 hours. Clara forgot to restock the candle shelf she'd meant to restock. Biscuit moved from his cushion to the top of the counter, something he almost never did, and positioned himself approximately 6 inches from Calhoun's coffee mug, which was his highest form of social acceptance. "I was not there that Saturday." This is what Clara told me later over coffee on a Wednesday when she'd called and asked if I wanted to come by, which she'd never done before on a Wednesday. She told it as information. Here is what happened. Here are the facts. Biscuit moved to the counter. They talked about a book. 2 hours passed. 2 hours, I said. "He has more to say than he seems," she said. "Most people do." She stopped, picked up her mug. "He said something that I keep thinking about when I said people need to be witnessed." "What did he say?" She looked at the window. "He said, yes, I think that's the thing." Just like that, not elaborating, just agreeing like it was a thing he'd known a long time and hadn't had the right word for. I waited. "Derek used to..." She stopped again, started differently. "When Derek and I were together, I used to say things and he would not disagree exactly, just redirect, or summarize it into something smaller. Like what I'd said had too much feeling in it and he needed to translate it into something more manageable." She looked down at her mug. "After enough years of that, you stop saying the things that have too much feeling. You edit yourself. You get very careful." She paused. "And then eventually you're so careful there's nothing left to say." "I know," I said. She looked at me. "Do you?" "My marriage lasted 4 years," I said. "Before Patricia left, she used to say I was emotionally unavailable. She wasn't wrong." I looked at my boots. "I was afraid that if I showed her everything, she'd decide it wasn't worth staying for." "So you hid it?" "I hid it so well she left anyway because she didn't know who she was married to." I looked up. "Fear is a terrible architect." Clara was quiet for a while. "He doesn't redirect," she said. "He just receives it, what you say, and then responds to the actual thing." "That sounds simple." "It should be. Apparently it isn't." She leaned back in her chair. "I'm not interested in him, Ellis." "You've mentioned that." "I'm just observing." "Yep. Stop doing that thing." "What thing?" "The thing where you agree with me, in a tone that communicates that you don't." "I'm very supportive." "You're infuriating." I got up to get more coffee. "He's coming Saturday," I said. "He comes every Saturday." "And you're there every Saturday." "It's my shop, Ellis." "And yet you called me on a Wednesday to tell me about the conversation." She said nothing. I refilled my mug. I came back. We sat there for a while in the particular silence of 2 people who have been alone long enough to be comfortable with silence, but are both, beneath that, slightly less comfortable than they're letting on. "The woman in Giants in the Earth," Clara said eventually. "Beret, she loses herself because no one can reach her, because she's out there on the flatlands and Perhansa, who loves her, who genuinely loves her, can't get inside to where she is. He tries, but he can't." She paused. "She built the wall herself, but the wall still destroyed her." I looked at her. "I'm fine," she said. "I know," I said. "I'm not Beret." "I know that too. I'm just..." She made a small, frustrated gesture. "I'm just tired of being careful." That was the most honest thing she'd said to me in 3 years, maybe in the entire time I'd known her. I didn't point that out. Some things you receive quietly. "So stop being careful," I said. "It's not that simple." "It's exactly that simple," I said. "It's just not that easy. Those are different things." She looked at me for a long time. Then she got up and started cleaning the coffee machine, which is what she did when a conversation had given her something she needed to go away and think about. I put on my coat. Ellis, she said without turning around. Yeah. Thank you. Any time, I said. And I meant it. The third Saturday of November, I came into the shop at 9:30, early enough that I arrived before him, which was the point. And I sat at my table and ordered coffee and opened a book I'd brought specifically so I could look at it while not reading it. He came in at 10, scraped his boots, took off his hat, the brown wool one, ordered coffee, sat at the table near the window. Clara came out from the back room where she'd been doing something with inventory and stopped when she saw him, which she always did, that small pause, barely visible like a gear engaging, and then continued forward to the counter. They had been doing this every Saturday for 4 weeks now, talking, drinking coffee, talking some more. He had told her about the apple orchard in detail, 32 trees, 17 varieties, a Honeycrisp section he'd grafted himself, a cider press he was rebuilding. She had told him about the shop's origin, how she'd bought it after the divorce on impulse and terror, with most of what she had, because she needed something that was hers and only hers, and she needed to build it with her own hands or she wasn't going to survive the year. She'd said that to him on the 4th Saturday, and I'd heard it from across the room. I needed to build it with my own hands or I wasn't going to survive the year, and I thought, there it is. There's the first real thing she said to him. He hadn't rushed it. He hadn't leaned in or said I understand or performed sympathy. He'd just been quiet for a moment, and then he'd said, the orchard was like that for me, after my father. And she'd nodded, and that had been enough. This Saturday at 11:30, Clara came out from behind the counter, which she'd never done before when he was there. She'd always stayed behind it, the wood between them like a very reasonable excuse, and she sat down at his table. With her coffee mug. Just sat down. He looked at her, didn't say anything. I've been trying to think of someone else to introduce you to, she said, and I keep not doing it. He was quiet. I keep not doing it because, she stopped, looked at her mug, because I'm being selfish, which I've decided is okay to admit. He looked at her steadily. That particular attention of his that was starting to feel, I think, like the most dangerous thing about him. The attention, the simple, complete fact of being seen. I don't need you to find me someone, he said. She looked up. I haven't needed that for a few weeks now, he said. She looked at him for a long time. I have a lot of damage, she said. I want you to know that. I'm not available the way you probably need someone to be. I've been closed a long time. I know, he said. You don't know the full extent. No, he said, but you could tell me. She looked at the window, the street, the snow that had been falling since dawn, soft and continuous and without urgency. I might not be able to get there, she said. Even if I want to, I might get halfway and stop. I've done that before, not with Derek, before Derek, a person I almost, and then I stopped because it was too much. And I've always thought that was the worst thing I did, stopping when I could have kept going. She looked at her hands around the mug. I don't want to do that to someone again. He was quiet for a moment. I'm not asking you not to stop, he said. I'm asking you to try. She looked at him. That's all I'm asking, he said. From anyone, just try. The rest of it we find out as we go. She said nothing. He turned his hat in his hands, that same gesture I'd seen when he first came in, the one that looked like discomfort, the one that was probably the closest he got to nervous. And he said, I've been alone 4 years. I know the shape of that life. I know what it costs. He set the hat down. I also know that I came down off that mountain and walked into your shop because something in me had decided it was time to try. And I think, he paused, I think you sitting down here today is the same thing. Clara looked at him for a long time. It might be, she said. That's enough, he said, for now. I was reading the same sentence of my book for the 12th time. December came in cold and absolute. This is what December does in Wyoming. It does not arrive gradually. It does not negotiate. One morning you wake up and the world has been rearranged overnight, and everything you thought you could rely on, the familiar light, the familiar landscape, the sense that the path between here and there is known and passable, has been covered, quietly and completely, and you have to find your way through the new version. I thought about that a lot, those December weeks. I thought about it more than was probably useful for a man with cattle to feed, and a fence line to maintain, and a bad knee that did not appreciate temperature drops below 20. But some ideas get into you and won't let go. Clara told me she went to the property on the first Saturday of December. She told me about it the following Tuesday in the shop when I came in, and she handed me coffee without being asked, and I understood immediately that I was being given a story and needed to pay attention. He'd invited her. That previous Saturday, the one where she'd sat down at his table, he'd mentioned near the end that if she ever wanted to see the orchard, she was welcome. Casual, not pushing, just leaving a door open. She thought about it all week. On Saturday morning, she closed the shop 2 hours early, put a sign on the door that said back at 2, and she drove the 14 miles north to Powder Ridge. She said the drive was the hardest part, not because the roads were bad, though they were. Because her mind was doing what minds do when they've been still a long time and are suddenly asked to move. Going back through all the reasons, cataloging all the evidence, reviewing the case for remaining where she was. She said she drove through all of it and kept going. The property was larger than she'd imagined. She said that was the first thing, how the land opened up once she turned off the county road, how she could see the mountains to the west with the kind of unobstructed clarity you can't get in town, and how the house sat in the middle of all of it with the look of something that had been built to last by someone who took lasting seriously. It needed paint, he'd told her that. The porch steps had one that was soft, and she found it immediately because he'd warned her which one. Inside, it was not a beautiful house, but it was a considered one, every room used for its purpose, nothing decorative that didn't also serve something, a kitchen that was genuinely a kitchen, with cast iron hanging from hooks and a long work table and jars of last summer's preserves lined on a shelf above the window. He showed her the orchard. She said it was quiet in a way she'd forgotten quiet could be. Not empty, there were birds moving in the stripped apple trees, and the sound of the creek somewhere to the east, and the creak of frozen branches when the wind moved through. But the busyness of the world was far away, and what was left was just space. She said she stood there in the snow between the trees and felt, for the first time in 3 years, like she could breathe all the way to the bottom. He stood next to her and didn't say anything, just let her have it. "This is where your father is," she said, not as a question. He was quiet. "Yeah," he said. "In the fall when the apples come, I think about him every day, what he'd think of the Honeycrisp section, whether the cider press is how he would have rebuilt it." He paused. "I think he'd find faults with the press." "Is that okay?" He thought about it. "I think so. I think that's how you keep someone with you. You stay in conversation with them." He looked at the trees. "I talk to him sometimes. Out here, I know how that sounds." "It doesn't sound strange," she said. "I told him about you," he said, and then immediately, "I'm sorry, I don't know why I said that." She turned to look at him. "I told him someone interesting had come into my life," he said. I wasn't expecting that to happen when I came down to town. I was trying to be practical, and then it turned into something I wasn't planning for." She looked at him for a long time. "What did you tell him?" she said. He exhaled, a breath visible in the cold air. "I told him she keeps a cat that has more dignity than most people I've met," he said, "and that she knows what fits and what doesn't, and that she said people need to be witnessed, and I thought about that for a week." Clara looked at the trees. "I've been alone for 3 years," she said. "My choice, mostly. There were people who might have, but I kept the door closed, on purpose." She paused. "Because what happened with Derek wasn't just that he left. It was that I spent 8 years building something with him, and I never understood that he wasn't building the same thing. We were building in the same house, and it turned out to be different houses, and I didn't know until it was over." She stopped. "I don't trust myself to see what's real. That's the actual thing. I don't trust my own judgment about," she made a small gesture, "about any of it." He was quiet. "You trusted yourself to come here today," he said. She looked at him. "You thought about it for a week," he said, "and then you came anyway." She turned back to the orchard, the stripped trees and the snow and the sound of the creek. "I'm terrified," she said. "I know," he said, "so am I." She turned to look at him again, and he was looking at her, and his face had something in it that she'd seen flickers of in the shop, but had been telling herself she was misreading. Something genuine and unperformed and slightly unwieldy, like he wasn't entirely practiced at showing it. "You," she said. He stopped, tried again. "I don't know if I know how to do this with a person. I've been up here 4 years and I've been okay. I've been okay. But okay is a particular kind of diminishment and I didn't always call it that." He looked at the mountains to the west. "Coming down was harder than staying would have been. And sitting in your shop was harder than not going in. And standing here right now is the hardest thing I've done since I scattered my father's ashes, and I'm doing it anyway." Clara said nothing for a moment. "Why?" she said. He looked at her. "Why is it worth it?" she said. "If it's that hard, why keep doing the hard thing?" He was quiet for a long time, long enough that she thought maybe he didn't have an answer or wasn't going to give it, or had decided the question was too large. Then he said, "Because I think you're worth the hard thing." She told me this sitting in the shop on a Tuesday with both hands around her coffee mug, and even in the retelling her voice did something strange in that last sentence. A slight catch, barely there, the sound of something that had been held together by careful tension letting go a few threads. "What did you say?" I asked. "I said something very intelligent and composed," she said. "Clara." She looked at her mug. "I cried," she said. "A little, not dramatically, my eyes got wet and I didn't stop it." "Good," I said. "He gave me his handkerchief," she said. "An actual handkerchief. Who carries a handkerchief?" "A man who thinks ahead," I said. "It had his initials on it, CB, very faded." She paused. "It was his father's, I think." I said nothing. "We walked back to the house," she said. "He made coffee. We sat in the kitchen and talked until it got dark." She paused again. "I helped him peel potatoes for supper." "You stayed for supper?" he asked. I said yes. I leaned back in my chair. "How were the potatoes?" I said. She looked at me, and then she smiled. Not the one that stops just below the eyes. The other kind. The kind that takes up her whole face and makes the cat look up from his cushion and blink. "They were good," she said. "Very simple, but good. I want to tell you it was straightforward from there. That they rode easily into whatever came next, unburdened by the things they'd each carried in. I want to tell you the wall came down all at once, in a single clean motion, like something built wrong finally admitting it. But walls don't come down that way. Anyone who tells you they do either hasn't had one or isn't being honest about what was on the other side." Clara called me 3 weeks later, a Sunday evening just before Christmas, and she was crying, which she never does and which told me before she said a word that something had happened. He had said something that caught her wrong. I don't know the details. She told me the outline, not the center, but the gist was that there had been a moment where he'd been trying to say one thing and she'd heard something else entirely, something that contained all the echoes of 8 years with Derek and the specific geometry of how that ended, and she'd reacted to the echoes instead of to him. She'd got her coat. She'd left. She'd driven home in the dark. "I overreacted," she said. "I know I overreacted. I could see it while I was doing it and I couldn't stop." "Did you call him?" I said. "He called me," she said. 20 minutes after I left, he said," she stopped. "He said, I don't know what I said, but I want to understand it. When you're ready." I sat there on the phone and thought about a man on a mountain who comes down when he's decided it's time and knocks on the door he's decided to knock on. He said, "When you're ready," I said. "Yes. Not if you're ready." A silence. "No," she said. "When?" "Clara, I know. That man's. I know Ellis." She called him back that night. I know because she texted me at 11:43 p.m. and the text said, "Okay." Which was, I thought, possibly the most complete sentence I'd ever received. Christmas in Harlan Creek is the kind of Christmas that exists now mostly in movies and in certain people's memories of how things used to be: snow on the storefronts, light in every window, the particular quality of a small town that turns inward for winter and finds, huddled against the cold, that it actually likes what's there. Clara decorated the shop. She always did pine boughs and candles and the ornaments from Petrov's collection and a small wreath on the door that she changed every week through December. But this year, she also added a cider press display in the window, not the real one, just some decorative props, and a small sign that said local apple cider. Briggs Orchard, Powder Ridge. 3 bottles on a wooden board, labeled in handwriting that was careful and dark, like someone pressing a pen against a decision they'd already made. He'd brought them down. She'd asked if she could sell them as a favor to a local producer. He'd said yes. She'd charged what he said and given him all the money, and he'd looked at the envelope like he wasn't sure whether to say thank you or whether that would complicate something. Thank you, he said. They sold well, she said. He said. You could bring more next fall, she said, if you wanted. He looked at her. Next fall is a long time from now. It is, she said. I'm just thinking ahead. He was quiet for a moment. That's good, he said. That's a good thing to do. I had them both to dinner on the 23rd. Clara and Calhoun and Nora Kessler because Nora's daughter was in Portland, and she'd have spent the evening alone otherwise. We had beef stew and bread I'd made from a recipe my mother left me that I only attempt twice a year because it's complicated and mostly works out. It worked out. We sat around the table, 4 of us, 1 very interested dog, and the snow outside doing what December snow does when it wants to be observed. And we talked about things that mattered and things that didn't, and moved easily between them the way you can with people who don't need to manage one another. Calhoun was quiet at the start, the way he always was, reading the room. But Nora asked him about the orchard, and he came alive in the way that people do when they're given the exact right question. And by the time we'd gotten through half the stew, he was explaining grafting technique to Nora with a precision and quiet enthusiasm that had her completely riveted, and also, I think, a little in love with the whole idea of apple trees. Clara sat across from him. I watched her watch him, and here's what I saw, which I have not told her and probably won't. I saw a woman who had been very still for a very long time, beginning, very slowly, not dramatically, not all at once, to move. Not toward him exactly, or not only toward him, toward herself, the version of herself that wasn't so careful. The one that stayed in the conversation, instead of editing it down to something manageable. The one who drove 14 miles on uncertain roads because something in her had decided it was time. I saw that, and I thought about my own 40 acres, and Pepper asleep at my feet, and Patricia who wasn't wrong about me even if the ending wasn't clean, and the particular courage required to want something out loud in a world that doesn't promise you'll get it. After supper, Nora made coffee and Calhoun washed dishes, which he simply started doing without asking, which Nora observed with the expression of a woman mentally composing a telegram reading excellent, proceed. And Clara sat at my kitchen table and looked out the window at the dark and the snow. Ellis, she said, yeah, I think I'm going to be okay. I looked at her. She looked at me. I know that sounds, she made a small gesture, small after everything, but I don't mean it small. I know you don't, I said. I mean I think I can, she stopped, tried again. I mean I don't think the wall is, another stop. She laughed quietly at herself at the difficulty of it. I mean I think something's different, and I think it's real. I think so too, I said. She looked back at the window. From the kitchen came the sound of water and dishes, and Nora telling Calhoun about a very bad Christmas she'd had in 1987. That was also accidentally the best Christmas she'd had because certain situations and certain people. And her voice faded in and out, and he said something low in response that I couldn't catch, and she laughed. That sound came through the wall and filled the room where we were sitting. Clara had her hands wrapped around a coffee mug, always the mug, always both hands, her particular comfort habit, and her eyes were wet again, just slightly, and she was not stopping it. You know what I keep thinking about, she said. What? That he brought a list, she said. He sat up there on that mountain and he decided he was done being alone and he wrote a list of what he was and what he was offering and he drove into town and walked into my shop. She paused. And it didn't have love on it. He said love comes later or it doesn't. I remember, I said. She looked at the window. I think it comes, she said, very quietly. I think it already has a little around the edges. I said nothing. Pepper lifted his head from my feet, looked at Clara, put his head back down. Even the dog knew to let that one settle. January. He's been coming down from the property twice a week now, Tuesday evenings and Saturday mornings. The Tuesday evenings Clara initiated, which he told me, when I ran into him at the feed store, like it was something he was still slightly astonished by. She asked, he said. Just those 2 words, but the way he said them, like asking, was some kind of minor miracle. She's learning to ask again, I said. He looked at me. Yeah, he said, I think that's exactly what it is. The orchard deal is real now, not just 3 bottles on a board. Clara's talked to a few other shops in the region, and there's interest in next year's harvest. They've been planning it on Tuesday evenings at her kitchen table, which I know because she told me and also because she sounded happy telling me. In the specific, careful way she is still learning to be happy, not all at once, not without looking over her shoulder occasionally, but moving toward it. Moving. That's the thing. I drove past the shop on a Thursday morning in late January, not stopping, just passing through town on my way to the vet with Pepper, who had a minor ear infection and was deeply aggrieved about the entire situation. The light was on in the window, early morning, pale and yellow, the rooster clock visible through the glass. The new display for February in the window, which I recognized as Clara's work, something with dried lavender and linen and the last of the winter candles. And there, I was at a stop sign and I could see in clearly for a moment. There was Biscuit on the counter, and there was Clara behind the register, and she was on the phone and laughing at something, fully laughing, the whole face kind, and her free hand was pressing flat against the counter the way she sometimes does when something's particularly funny. The light changed, I drove on. Pepper looked at me from the passenger seat with the expression of a dog who has strong opinions about ear infections and unnecessary delays. Yeah, okay, I said. He sighed. I drove. And somewhere behind me, 14 miles north, up a county road that's rough in winter but passable for someone who knows it, up through the land that opens wide and the mountains that are always there whether you're looking at them or not. 32 apple trees stood in the snow, stripped and patient, waiting for spring.